Recording which just started. Okay, cool. Thanks, James. Okay, I'll do that now. So I am Chizaram. I am a software engineer, mostly specialized in front-end development. Um, but I've been, done mobile development professionally. I've done back-end development professionally. I'm also a computer science graduate, and so I know a few things about actual computer science. And so I've been in the industry for over 4 years professionally, but I've been coding for a really long time. I started coding when I was like 14, even though I stopped at the point and picked it up again. But yeah, I've been around the block a few times, so uh, I've seen things come and go a bit. So yeah, so I'm someone who loves learning things well, and I love challenging myself, and I just believe that the challenge is where you grow, like venturing into unfamiliar things and you know challenging yourself to really learn things well, not just on the surface. So that's mostly me for the introductions. Um, so I'll be presenting on a topic. This topic was born out of my observation um, through the years, learning, working, because the learning never stops, right? But learning and working as a software engineer, and it's something I feel like I I got it really early in my career. I'm not sure how or why, but I feel like some people didn't get it, and I see some of them struggle. So it's one of the things I'm going to talk about. So just keep that in mind for when I introduce the topic. But real quick before I move in, I'd just like to know, like, some of us who are here, just what are we all front end people, or do we have a mixed crowd of like front end, back end? You know, I just want to know. Is there any back end person here? Is there any mobile person here? Is there any UX person here?
We are all front-ended.
Sorry?
I said we are all front-end.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so it's cool that a lot of us are front end. So I, for me, it's a thing, at least what I've noticed the most, and what I think is also mostly out there is a lot of people start out with front end development because it's like one of the easiest things to get started with. You can easily see the results of what you're doing, and there's a lot of resources out there, so it's natural that a lot of people start out with front end development. So it's cool. So I learned that most of us are, very new to this whole stuff. So I'll try to keep things as beginner friendly as possible. So without um further, blabbing, let's get right into the presentation. Uh, so yeah, so I'm going to be talking to us. This might not be as long. I don't know. It depends on how I'm led. But I really want you to pay attention. Um, because I feel like this is a topic that will really take your career, your software development to the next level, especially if you start practicing it early, if you start doing it early. Um, so yeah. So what's in the name? That's the title of my presentation. What's in a name? And how learning to name things correctly can take your software development to the next level. So when it comes to writing software and reasoning about writing software and solving problems through writing software, names are important, right? And they are important because you get to name a lot of things, right? A typical, you know, if you're going to write code for maybe 2 hours, you would have come up with like, I don't know, 100 different names for different things. Some of them are abstract, It's not like you see a chair and you know that it's a chair, or you see a book and you know that it's a book. Um, some of these things, especially with software engineering and solving problems with code, you really have to think about them before giving them names. And a lot of the things too that you see in existence or the things you'll be working with, they also have names, and you also need to communicate these things, to other people. This is what I'm talking about, or this is what I'm talking about, right? With names. And those names can often be, or the things you're trying to address can often be a bit abstract, right? They are not things you can point to, or they are not things that have shape. They are mostly the mental ideas of other people, that they've managed to give names, and then everybody's calling it by that name, right? So naming is very important, and it's one of those things that when you put in the work and um, when you really practice it, struggle with it at first, but be determined to get better at it, you will you watch yourself soar in your career, and you'll be able to get to certain heights that some other people can get to, because they mostly lack the ability to communicate complex ideas and to reason about complex ideas, because they don't have all of the mental faculty to do that, because of their lack of attention to naming and understanding things. So to the next slide, um there's a popular saying, uh says there are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. So I will not go into what cache invalidation is, because it's a bit advanced. But then naming things is one I'm sure that a lot of us can relate to. So Phil Carton, I don't know who he is, and I mean it's pretty popular too around software engineering circles to not know who made this quote, but we just give it to that guy. So there are two hard things in computer science. First one, and then naming things. So naming things is really, really difficult. It's one of those things that you don't know is difficult, until you see the difficulty play out. So mastering naming can really, really take your software engineering to the next level, and you'll see how. So why does naming things matter? I mean, you might just say it's just a name, right? That was why I named this what's in a name, right? But then one of the reasons why you should name things well is that it helps you understand code, documentation, books, and discussion faster. So the thing with software development, uh, especially modern software development and front-end engineering as well, or JavaScript, let's just say JavaScript, is that a lot of things are ideas born from um, people, either group of people in a company or one person, with lots of experience. So it means that someone who gives birth to an idea may not have the skill to be able to write about that idea. Someone who gives birth to an idea may not be, proficient enough to write a book or to make a tutorial. So they just, maybe make a library, they put up a little documentation, and then other people further those discussions, right? So as you grow in your career, you often see that some of the solutions and your learnings will not be coming from books or tutorials. You see some of them in Stack Overflow, right? The question and answer website. You see some of them in GitHub issues, which are like discussions around, a problem that someone encounters with a project. And so a lot of times when you come into these discussions, people are usually very precise with their language, because they are not talking, they are typing. And I mean, as a human being, you know that it's much, much faster to talk. You can say a million and one things in a short time, but it's not as easy to type. So brevity matters. So a lot of these things are going to be compressed, right, into um, very short write-ups, to try and get people's opinions, to try and further the discussion. So a lot of times, especially at the beginning, or even for the first maybe 2 or 3 years, you will struggle with trying to read books or understand documentation or even like GitHub issues. Why? Because a lot of communication is compressed. There's a lot of things they assume that you already know, right? And so they won't like spend a whole paragraph talking about that thing, right? So when you really learn to name things, recognize things by their names, practice definitions, and have those in your head, um, you really get to understand all of this faster. So the second one is it reduces ambiguity and makes communication more precise. So ambiguity is when something is open to different interpretations. And when you are communicating about software or like problem solving generally, you want to reduce, the possibility that one thing, can mean different things as much as possible because someone can pick up on that and go and do something completely different from, what you were initially saying. So which is why precise communication is very important. So thirdly, um, naming things applies also beyond software development, right? And it helps you think clearly and improves your problem solving. So when you have the name of things, when you know the names for things and you know the definition or the meaning or the history behind those names, you will naturally, not like naturally, but you progressively be able to think clearly about solving problems. I remember one blog post I read one time, and the guy said something. The guy said some people, someone started learning French a year ago, and then the person is trying to write a poem in French, but the person finds himself struggling. He's like, I've been speaking French for 1 year now, 2 years, but I don't know how to write a poem. The truth is that, and the person now like, maybe I'm not creative enough, I don't have enough ideas and all of that stuff. But the truth is that it could be that the person does not even have enough French vocabulary. The person has not read enough French poems. The person has not explored, the terrain of French poems. So the person doesn't have enough information in them to be able to, put those together and come up with something new or something creative. So this is why, learning things by their names, really mastering the meaning behind things, and understanding a lot of the, more technical ways that people communicate things will really help you think faster. So now, just like if someone says, um, let me use, I know you guys may have not started learning React, but let's just say someone says, React is a declarative is a declarative JavaScript framework um, for building user interfaces, right? So that definition, the first time I had it, it didn't make any sense to me. And you'll be surprised that a lot of experienced front-end developers, um, you throw this explanation at them and they will not be able to tell you what it means, right? Although they write very good React code, they can do wonderful things with that technology. But because they don't take the time to study the names of things, study sentences like that, or maybe participate in this kind of discussions, they simply, there are lines of discussion that they cannot come into, even though they have experience in React, right? Because if someone says, okay, why is React declarative? Why is React a Okay, I said it was a framework, but it's not really a framework, it's a library, right? So what's the difference between a library and a framework? Why is it called declarative instead of perhaps something like imperative? Are there other declarative UI libraries? You know, what's different between all these declarative UI libraries, right? So discussions like these, deeper discussions, right, which are held in, more advanced technical circles, and when people want to solve more advanced problems where they might even be deciding if React is the correct library to use for this project, right? If you can't, participate in those kind of discussions, even though if you don't know the lingo sort of, or if you don't have enough understanding, you won't be able to participate in those kind of discussions, which is why naming is important. So it also helps to make debugging easier. So a lot of times when you write code, um you will get errors thrown at you from, the compiler, or one of the tools in your environment to tell you that something is wrong. And a lot of times those errors, they are not tutorial masters, or they are not, tutorial people on YouTube. They won't try to, the error won't try to explain everything for you, right? Your error will just tell you this is that happened in very, very precise language. So if you do not know how to decode precise language, or you've not been, improving yourself on how to use and decode precise language, you will struggle. So those are just some of the few, reasons why, names matter. So so yeah, let's talk about the journey to clarity. So now that you know that, naming things matter, definitions matter, learning how to, you know, understand and use technical words matter. How can you journey towards, having more clear vocabulary, better vocabulary, as a tech person, right? So one of the things you have to understand is that there are some terms, there's not a lot of them, but there are some terms that don't have clear and stable definitions. So you might go here and you hear someone say it a different way, or you might Google it, you might ask ChatGPT, and they will say not totally different things, but there are a lot of differences in what they have said. So that's one of the things you need to take note of as you journey towards clarity. So now your job in that instance is to look for the essence, the particular thing that those different definitions they share, right? So for example, I know that one of the things I from time to time I have to go back and ask myself is scope. You might have heard of scope if you've been learning JavaScript. So what is scope, right? So scope has you know a core part to that definition or to that word or to the meaning behind it. But there are a lot of other things around it. And when you Google scope, or when ask maybe an AI to what scope is, you will get a lot of things, right? But there's a core part, to that word called scope. So when you understand this, even if you encounter different definitions, now your job is to look for that core part, write it down, and keep going over it again and again and again until you just know it intuitively, right? So that the next time you encounter it in a discussion, it's not something that you have to stop and try to remember or try to Google or what is this thing said. And then you must have lost, a lot of time or part of what you're supposed to understand, or maybe you might even give up on what you already said because you don't understand it. So it's important to know that. So the second thing to note is that our brains are noisy channels. Our brains are noisy channels, so we often misinterpret things, first impressions, right? So you really have to understand this. Our brains are noisy channels in the sense that um not everything that flows through your head is information. Some of it is noise, and that can happen when you first learn something. You think you know something, your brain assumes a lot of things, but then what you have to keep doing is to keep studying, keep reading, keep getting definitions that will help to, thin down the amount of noise or irrelevance in the information you've gotten so that you can get to the core part of that thing. So you will encounter this a lot when for example, when you start learning React, right? There are a lot of React is one of those things where when you finally understand it, and as you get more acquainted with the framework, you begin to ask yourself, like, why was this even confusing, right? But it takes time, unlike a lot of other things. So um at first, when you learn something, you might think you have gotten it. For example, in React, you hear of something called state. Use state. You would think you know what state is until you go to write a program, or maybe you go to read a tutorial and they start talking about state. And you're like, I thought I knew what state was, but they just said something about state, and I'm not even sure what to do with that thing they said. So at that point, what you do is you go back to the definition of state. Sometimes what I do is I literally Google in a dictionary, what is state? What is the dictionary definition of state? Because one thing you need to understand is that someone gave that concept a name, and that person had something in mind, and that person also has relevant experience and context. So that was why they gave it that particular name. So you trying to explore, and trying to get to the root of that will really bring you into that person's thinking, because you cannot imagine that the person who built or the people who built React are confused about React. No, they are not authors of confusion. So they know this thing, right? And that's why they've been able to take it this far. They've been able to build it this much. And a lot of people have been able to find success using it because they know it. So imagine if you can think like those people. So if you can think like those people, you also know it too, right? But at first, when you encounter things, there will be a lot of noise in your head. What you think you know versus what you actually know, and versus what the actual thing is. So you need to learn to keep going back to definitions, you know, until you've taken out the noise from what you think you know. so so techniques to improve your naming and understanding. I've mentioned some of them, but one of the things you really need to do, this is a very simple practice, but it's very, very powerful. I know it has helped me a lot personally. Keep asking yourself, what does this really mean? Right. So now that doesn't mean that at every time you're trying to do something, you have to know everything that that thing means. You're going to waste a lot of time doing things. But perhaps if you're given perhaps a task to say build out a screen, right? What you do is focus on finishing the task, and then perhaps have a note somewhere where you write down definitions of things you didn't get, things you like to look up later, and then use your time later to look those things up. It's very, very important that you keep trying to, you know, recall what you think something is, because like I said, our brains are noisy channels. So you might have had something the first time and you think you know it. But the first time you had it, your brain encoded both that the real definition and what you think is the definition, but it's not actually the definition or what you think that thing is. So it's very, very important that you keep asking yourself. When you ask, you don't know it, you go back, Google, search, look for articles, stop, ask yourself, okay, what is this thing actually? And then you tell yourself. If you're not still able to tell yourself, you go back, keep refining, until a point comes when, I mean, if you look at your life, you know that there are things that at a point you didn't know what they were, you didn't know how to define them, right? But now you know them like second nature. So the same thing is going to happen with a lot of the new concepts you're going to be encountering when you write code or as you go through your software engineering career solving problems. So it's very, very, very important that you that you keep this practice up, because it's really going to help you refine a lot of rough edges. So read and memorize precise definitions. This second one is so important. I know I said the first one is important, but the second one is very, very important. So a lot of people don't do this, and I'm not sure why, but it's one of those things that has really, really, really been a game changer personally for me. For example, I was able to tell you the definition of React. I mean, it's not like React in a dictionary, but if you go to the website, I didn't open the website to see it, but I memorized that definition, right? That React is a declarative JavaScript library for building user interfaces, right? I had to memorize that short sentence. I had to go back and ask myself, what is declarative? What is library? What are user interfaces? I know what JavaScript is, so I don't need to look that up. So these precise definitions, first of all, they build your vocabulary, because now you see that I've not just learned the meaning of React, I've learned the meaning of declarative, I've learned the meaning of library, right? I've also learned some parallel things like what's the difference between a library and a framework, you know. While also looking up declarative, you find out that while declarative is an approach to doing something, there's also another approach called imperative, right? So that means there are imperative libraries and there are declarative libraries. So when you memorize precise definitions, you expand your vocabulary and you also expand your knowledge of related things. So this is very, very important in software engineering as a whole, because a lot of things are related, right? A lot of things are tied together. And as you continue to expand your knowledge, all of those adds up to to make you a more wholesome person who has way more understanding about what they are doing. So that tip is very, very important, as simple as it sounds. And then the third one is learn and use spaced repetition. So I may not be able to go into much details on what spaced repetition is, but I will leave that as an assignment for you to, dig into it. I use it every day. It's a system of memorizing things using flashcards, right? Now, flashcards are simple question and answer cards. They can be physical cards, they can be digital cards. I use the digital version, right? I have an app. The name of that app is called Anki, Anki. So basically, what it does is you create a card that has two sides. The first side is a question, and the other side is the answer to that question. So what that app will do is when you add that card to the app, from time to time, that app will, when you open it up and you want to take a study session, it will bring up the question before you. For example, you wanted to memorize the meaning of closure in JavaScript, right? It will just bring up that thing. It will just bring up closure or what is closure, depending on what you added as a question. And then you will try to define what closure is. The app is not checking what you define, it's you and yourself. So now when you try to define it, you encounter maybe like three different scenarios. One of them is you remember it very, very well. Second, you know it, but it's kind of hazy. Maybe you're using the wrong words here and there, or and then the third one is that you don't even know it at all. You don't remember it at all. Right. So what happens is that when you've gone through that exercise, you click on a button instead of show answer. And then that answer will bring up like different options to ask you how well did you do with this thing you just try to recall. So if you say you did well, what it will do is it will move the next time that you will, you know, try to remember that thing from the app. It will move it further than if you said you forgotten it. So for example, I try to I put in a card called React. What is React? The question. The back is React is a declarative, like a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So now, um, if I try to recall this thing tomorrow with the flashcard, and then I say something like that to myself, you're the one judging it, though the app is not judging you. You're just putting in the results of your judgment. So assuming tomorrow I open the app and then it shows me this particular card, what is React, and I'm able to answer it correctly, I will click on good. So now what that app will do, it might move the next time I will look at that definition to 2 days later, not tomorrow. But if I say I don't know it very well, it might move it to the next 10 minutes and remind me to record this definition again. So what happens is that because of this style of memorizing things, you can memorize a lot of things. You can imagine putting 20 cards. So 20 cards does not mean that you keep um, recalling 20 things every day. Some of the ones you recall more easily, it will move it, to maybe like 3 days, 7 days. In fact, there are times when it will get as high as 200 days apart, and you still remember those things. If you check, there are things from secondary school that you still remember. I'm sure a lot of us still remember the meaning of photosynthesis. I don't want to embarrass anybody by asking, but but I'm sure a lot of us still remember the meaning of photosynthesis. So spaced repetition is a very powerful technique for memorizing things. I personally use spaced repetition a lot. The major thing I use spaced repetition for is memorizing Bible passages. And I can proudly tell you that I have over 200 like different, Bible quotations in my head. Like I can just, if you call it, I can tell you. I'll just read it for you. Call it, I'll read it for you. Call it, I'll read it for you. I can stand at this spot and give you like 100, from my head. Why? Largely because of spaced repetition. So it's a very powerful technique. You can also use it to learn technical concepts. So there's ChatGPT and other AI tools. You can ask them about spaced repetition, and they will, be kind enough to give you um, a guide. So there are a couple benefits of mastering naming and precision. It helps you understand complex concepts faster. It helps you communicate better with your teammates and avoid confusion, like I initially spoke about. So it helps you write, cleaner and more maintainable code. And this is kind of interesting because I actually read an article that was last week, I think, and that article made a claim, which I can stand by. It said that 90% of writing clean code or more maintainable code is naming things, naming things. And to be honest, there's a lot I can say about this, or I will not go into much detail, but just have it in mind that, first of all, as a software person, your major aim when you write software, you should be writing it for your future self who is going to read it and another person who is going to read it. Don't first write it for the computer to execute, right? And the reason why that is because that, especially now that there are AI tools, right? Solving a problem is not, it's not the big, you know, it's not like the big thing again, right? Because some of the things you'll be learning. So for example, that you might, when you're learning JavaScript, they might ask you take this list, iterate over the list and print out blah 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 blah. It's just something you can type into an AI to do this, do that, and it will just spit out code for you. But the thing is that a lot of the a lot of the jobs you will be working in, right? The problems won't be that simple, right? So it means that explaining them won't also be that simple. So the more you know how to use precise naming, the easier it is for you, right? So for example, if you want to write a simple program that goes through a number and then prints my name is X, that's a number that is in that array. It's a very simple problem, right? But then if you go to solve a more complex problem, right, and you don't know how to word that problem, and then write your code in a way that when someone is reading, the person understands, okay, this is what you're trying to do, and this is what you're trying to do, and this is why you're using this is why you're doing that. The complexity of the problem added with the complexity of your code will, bring an explosion of confusion. So that is why mastering naming precision, communicating clearly is very, very important as a software person. When people can easily read your code, and when you yourself can easily read your code, because trust me, that thing you wrote, that code you're writing tonight or tomorrow, in the next 3 months, if they show you that code, you will not believe that you're the one that wrote it. You'll be like, what's going on here? Why did the person do this? What is this? And then you now remember that it's you that wrote it. This is the story of our life as software engineers. So it helps you debug more effectively. And then the last point is that it accelerates your learning and problem solving skills, which is one of the things I believe that if you truly take this concept or this teaching to heart and begin to practice this and make it a pillar of your career, of your work, you see that you learn things a lot faster. When you listen to some of your colleagues trying to communicate complex concepts in very imprecise ways, you would you begin to see that the source of their confusion is not that that thing is confusing, but they are using the wrong, words and definitions and all of that. So you will see that this will cut out a lot of, you know, learning craft for you and really accelerate your ability to solve problems. So in conclusion, naming things is hard, but learning to name things and getting good at naming things is very powerful. So when you can name things better, you communicate better with teammates and avoid confusion. So you must always strive for clarity in your communication when you're documenting things and when you're discussing things. Because believe me, a lot of the problems you're solving now as an upcoming software engineer is quite different from, not that quite different, it's related, but the difficulty level is going to be quite different from, when you get um, an actual job or get into an organization that solves really difficult problems. Like some of them are mind-blowingly difficult that you wonder how people are surviving. Just like sometimes, even though they are coming down now, you might hear like some of the salaries of some software engineers and be like, why are they paying people this much? It's not code that they are writing. until you go and jam that code, you will know that there are some problems that can plain discourage you in life. Like you just be like, I'm not doing software again. They are that difficult. There are problems that are that difficult. There are too many moving parts, so much complexity. And then when you now bring in the problem of imprecision in naming things, understanding things, maybe you're trying to read a paper, right? And then you don't even understand half of the terms they are using. You're going to struggle. So it's very important that we strive for clarity. So now, finally, small improvements in naming will lead to big improvements in problem solving. I know some of us might have felt like this topic might not have felt like a big topic, but truth is, I've personally seen it, change my career because sometimes when I get into, interviews and I begin to speak about what I know, like a lot of times I often get this, people often get this impression that I'm very professional, right? I've had it a lot of times, and that has largely come because I try my best to really, put in the work to understand technical concepts, be able to articulate them, know their meanings, know their definitions, know how to communicate them, right? Because one of the major things you'll be doing as a software engineer is not just solving problems, but communicating your solutions to other people. So the better you are able to do this, the more opportunities you will have access to, the more good impression you will have, before the people who will work with you. So it's really, really, really important. As simple as and as straightforward sort of this topic might feel, it's something that I believe is very impactful and that it has. Sorry, a call came in. Can you still hear me? Please confirm if you can still hear me. Okay. All right. So I'm done. My name is Chizaram again. I don't really have any social media handles. I'm actually off all social media. Um, that's LinkedIn logo. I planned to sort of reactivate my LinkedIn for the sake of this presentation, but that didn't quite work. So sorry you won't be getting any LinkedIn links to follow me, but you can get my number from some of the organizers and just hit me up, you know, um, especially around this topic of naming things and software engineering generally. I would love that since there are not too many of you. If you guys were like 100, I would have refrained from saying this because I don't really have as much time to reply that many people. But yeah, that's me. Thank you all for listening, and I really hope you take away a lot from this talk. Thank you to the organizers as well for giving me the opportunity to share some of my knowledge with you. I really hope it's helpful. Thank you.